friends. Welcome to Sky House Herbs podcast. I'm Ashley Elenbaas, a clinical herbalist, and in this space, I share my knowledge and experience with plant medicine to help you on your own journey of healing and transformation. Join me in exploring the ancient wisdom of plant spirit medicine and how it can be used to heal the body, mind, and spirit. We'll talk to experts in the field and share stories from people who've been transformed by powerful plant allies. New episodes are released each Monday, so please subscribe. And now, let's explore this mystical world of plant medicine together. Hey everyone, welcome in. I am so glad to see you today, and we are going to continue our deep dive into the ancient goddess traditions of old Europe, of the Neolithic era. I'll give you a little bit of a recap, and then our main focus is going to be looking at the symbol of the snake and the goddess in ancient culture and how it shows up today. And I have a special plant, mint, and I'll talk about a few different varieties of mint that can connect you with this medicine and a few home rituals that you can incorporate to honor the goddess, to honor the snake, and to honor your home. Before we go into today's content, I just want to remind you, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please take a second, just click that subscribe button. It helps people to find me, and it helps you find me again so you can stay connected with my work. Also wanted to mention, if you haven't yet checked out my herbal apprenticeship course, we are starting at the end of April. There's still time to register. We will hold registration open until May 15th, and we'll head on over to my website so you can have a look and see what my course looks like. Share screen, Sky House Herbs. Here is the Sky House Herb School website. Go over to courses, click on Herbal Foundations Apprenticeship, and have a click through. And you can read all about the upcoming apprenticeship, what you'll learn, ways that you'll be connected with your classmates. And really, this is an engaged course. So this course allows you to engage with plant medicines from day one. And I'll teach you everything from how to identify plants in nature to how to make your own plant medicines. So I hope you'll join. Scroll all the way down to the bottom to see our enrollment options. You can make a single payment. Click here to make monthly payments. And if this is out of your budget, you can apply for tuition assistance, where we offer need-based pricing. So fill out this form, and then you'll see which options you're eligible for. We have monthly need-based tuition discounts as well as lump sums if you just want to pay it and be done. So check that out if you want to learn more. All right. So today's topic, it's a big one. I have to admit, I spent about 6 hours today, and that's on top of like the hours I spend pretty much in every free moment I have in researching the goddess archetypes and goddess work in the modern world and in the current times we're living in. So I went down a wonderful, I'll call it a snake hole because it's not a rabbit hole today. I went down into the realm of the snake pretty much all day. I've been there for 6+ hours, really looking at the imagery, reading and listening to people talk about folklore traditions from Romania to Ukraine. So I'm not going to be able to fit everything into this talk because this is like a shorter, 30-minute exploration of these topics. And if you want to learn more, let me know, and maybe I'll put together a little webinar series where we can look at this in greater depth together. So here are the things we're going to be looking at today. I love how my camera follows me, right? Like a snake. And that's part of the energy of the snake, is movement. And we'll see how this really plays out in the way that they depicted the snake in these ancient figurines from between 10,000 and 3,000 BC. So here's what we're going to cover today. Let me give you an outline. We're going to look at the snake as a symbol and what it meant to the early people, and especially to the goddess culture of old Europe. We'll talk about its incorporation into, I mentioned this, figurines and folklore and story. We will talk about, and I'll show you actually a bunch of figurines and artwork incorporating the goddess figure and the snake. Then we'll look at modern folklore, and specifically as the snake as a housemate. That might seem like, wait, I don't want a snake in my house. Well, actually, you probably already have one, and we'll talk about what that means and how to befriend the snake of your hearth And then lastly, we'll take a look at plant mint and the mint family herbs and how to use mint in your home for ritual purposes and for welcoming in guests and little rituals for feeding the snake of your home. Okay, so I'm going to start my slideshow now, and I want to look at some symbols and some of the beautiful images that we know and that we've seen from a lot of the excavation work of wonderful pioneers like Maria Gimbutas, who is a Lithuanian archaeomythologist. This class is this episode is part of a series that I'm putting together. So if you want to learn more about the backstory of Maria Gimbutas, listen back to episode 1 on the egg, and you'll hear a little bit more. I want to mention her because her work has been very deeply inspiring to me and how I am viewing the ancient goddess worship and these beautiful icons. I also want to mention another person who is a more modern day teacher, Max Dashu. And she is a archivist and has a wonderful course I'm taking right now called Womanity. And in this course, she really looks back through historical information of the goddess worship, matriarchy, feminism, and a lot of the iconography and artwork that we see through time. So her whole life work is really to preserve a lot of these ancient stories and images. So you can go to her website. I think it's called the Suppressed Histories Archive. And I'll include a link in the description so that you can find it and find her work and find her courses. But some of what I've taken today is from her courses. And then a lot of what I am referring to is based on the work of Maria Gimbutas. This is her book, The Language of the Goddess, also her book, The Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe. And I'll include links to those sources as well. So if you want to read the actual source literature, I'll give all of that to you in the description below. So these are some images of the snake and bird goddess and how they show up in the ancient world, in folk art, and in the modern world. And what's interesting to note about the images of the snake and the bird, and in the last episode, I spent a lot of time on water and the water bird and the connection of water and birds, as you know, they are both seen as symbols of life. And, water birds that live near water were seen as very sacred. They were seen as, manifestations of the goddess herself. So we often see in a lot of old work and paintings throughout time to the modern day, this depiction of the bird and the snake. And it's interesting because Maria talks about how probably these ancient matriarchal goddess worshiping cultures, they looked and they saw the beauty of the birds that live in the sky above. So, like what lives in the air and above, and then what lives below ground, what lives underground, which is the snake. Hilda, my beautiful guard dog is guarding the roost. So we have these images of sky gods, or like the sky goddess in birds, and then the image of the snake goddess of what lives below. And then we see these two figures coming together in a bunch of different ways. And we'll continue to look at more figurines. Let's go to the next slide here. This is just a really old image of the snake as it appears on pottery and bowls from the Vinca period in Yugoslavia. And these were excavated, a lot of this excavation work was done at the beginning of the century, or the 19th century, 20th century. And these were dated between 6000 and 5001 BC. And so Maria writes how these bowls were probably used in rain ceremonies and rain invocation in attempt to account for the holes, so that it was like calling in for the rain, and to show that I think in some ways the permeability of like let's call in the rain, but we won't keep it all, right? Like we'll let the water that you give pour through. because they didn't really need it. They needed it for their fields, they needed it for bathing, for their rivers and streams, for the wild herbs they gathered along the water edges. So I love this way that they had holes to allow the water to pour through. We can also see a lot of the image, the iconography of the snake and the spiral. So there was a deep connection between the snake and the spiral of life. And this connection of the regenerative cycle, as it's often understood as being the cycle of birth and death and then regeneration. So regeneration as everything that exists on the earth, and we see this season to season, that things come into bloom and they fall out of bloom, they go into the earth, and then they come back in the next year. So this idea of regeneration was so critical to the early people, the early humans, and they saw it. They didn't need to believe in some other force other than what nature already showed them. And so the snake, as being this symbol of regeneration, in that it goes into hibernation, it wakes up in the spring, it suns itself on the rocks, and then it retreats back into the earth, and then it sheds its skin and it shows its own regenerative capacity. So just a few points to make about the snake as a symbol. One of the things that's really interesting to note is that you see the snake on a lot of the goddess figures, and Maria Gimbutas in her work really said it wasn't the snake body as being seen as so important, but it was the way the snake moved and the way the snake embodied the life force. And she even references the Indian concept of kundalini, or this coiling life force that travels up the spine that we see in a lot of ancient Indian texts and Indian artwork. And so she likened that same understanding of the life force and the snake as why we see the snake depicted so much on the goddess. And you can see here in this image to the left from the Minoan period, here we have the snake coming up her arms. We have the snake wrapping around her waist and around her breasts. We have the snake around her waist and the snake around her lap. So we see this moving snake-like energy, this life force wrapping all around her, even her head. Look, on her hat, she has a snake coiling around her head. And so the snake, I don't think the snake was seen as deadly or as scary as we think of snakes today. I think snakes were seen as being very revered and mystical creatures because they can kill, they can attack, but typically they don't. Like I've been in the woods enough to have been around snakes, and copperheads are a little more aggressive, but generally speaking, most snakes are like spiders. They don't want to bother you. Like they pretty much mind their own business. And obviously, if you step on them or walk into their web, they're going to be like, usually they're going to try to get away, and sometimes they'll strike, but they're not like aggressive by nature. And I have to think that our ancestors understood this and that they had a deep respect for snakes and reptiles and the power, the venom that they contain that can, pretty much move through the veins of someone, turn the veins like red or blue or black, and then they could see the snake poison often going through the veins and then killing someone. And so if that is something to be respected. And I feel like rather than feared, there was a deep respect for snakes. Snakes also symbolized a closeness to water, and you see in a lot of the iconography and on a lot of the symbols on the goddess, the snake and water. Water symbols often being spirals or meanders or chevrons or the S shape, which we talked about in the last video. So we will see that showing up quite a bit. And look at even here on this image of a drawing of one of the snake goddess figures, this one over here, you can see there's a snake coiled up on the back of her hips. So, you wouldn't necessarily think about having snakes behind you if they were dangerous. This woman doesn't look like she is at all afraid. She looks very confident, eyes open, arms out, breasts out, standing very upright and very confidently. And so, I think there was a much deeper respect for these creatures. Just to remind you of the area that we're going to be looking at with a lot of these figurines. They were excavated from what we call the old Europe area, which is Italy and Greece and Turkey. And right around here, on the outer edge, we have Romania. And we even have, I'll show you a little later, the way that some of these cultures migrated up into sort of northern, or I guess they call it Eastern Europe, but a lot of the central civilizations, these matriarchal civilizations that lived peacefully, that lived in a way that honored the goddess and honored the earth as the regenerative force that was given offerings to, that was revered and celebrated. This sort of matriarchal culture is called, it's considered to be called Old Europe. That was coined by Maria Gimbutas in her work. So if you're curious to learn more, check out her books. Here's an image. This is actually something that Maria excavated herself. This is a image of a bird slash snake goddess. And again, we're going to see this again and again. So we have this sort of like owl shaped face with these owl eyes and sort of this beak face. But then look at all these snake look like lines and meanders and curls around the body. So this could be depicted as the life force moving through the body of both land or earth and the sky. The human as one that can live in both worlds, has the power to live on earth but transcend through dreams and music into the sky. I thought this was really interesting. This is a very, very old figure from southeastern Turkey. It was dated between 10,000 and 7,500 BC. So this is very, very old. And what was so interesting was when I was, again, searching the webs, looking for images of the snake and the goddess. Well, this came up, and attached to it was, I don't think there's no reference Maria has made to this particular one, because it said this is an ominous sign of a snake going up the back of the head as if danger was looming. This must have been a sign of warning. And it was obviously written by someone who, a modern mind would see this as a symbol of warning. Whereas I really don't think Maria, and I don't think the ancient archaeomythologists would say that there is something scary about this. This is more just a symbol of what is. Of, I would say, the Kundalini Shakti energy moving up the back of the head and hitting maybe the pineal gland, the third eye, or the awakening of psycho-spiritual energy. I mean, we don't really know, but I just thought it was funny that, some modern man was like, oh, this is a sign of peril. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. Here's another image of a bird and snake goddess from the Neolithic period. This one was found in Greece and ancient Crete, on the island of Crete, between 5,300 and 3,000 BC. Maria talks about, we see these like thick legs that are very snake-like and sort of these markings of the snake. And then we have this bird-like beak nose and this sort of bird-like feather of the hair. And this is a very, sometimes some people call this like a birthing goddess because she's, seated. I don't know. I don't know any woman who's birthed seated like this. But there is an image of her being like seated and steady. And we can just see her voluptuousness and her health and her vitality as she holds the underworld and the above worlds in her body. Here are some other images. This is the Lady of I'm not going to pronounce this right, Pazadarzik in central Bulgaria. This was dated around 4,500 BC. And this, again, we have that beak of the nose. You can see it really well here on this side image. And then here is the snake, these snake emblems sort of curving around her whole lower body. And she's seated on a stool of some type. Someone referenced this as being the grandmother goddess statue, and I think she does. She looks like a very beautiful goddess grandmother. And look at the vulva. You can see this pubic triangle here with this almost, I wonder what this symbol represented for them, but it almost looks like a snake or kind of like an infinity. And look at that open vulva, right? Like it's very obvious what that is. And here are her breasts, right? She has little mouth holes. Her eyes are slits. She must be in prayer or deep contemplation. Her hands are crossed over her belly, often a symbol of mothering or vitality, or, maybe just peace and meditation. But I just think this is such a beautiful, beautiful example of the goddess holding both the sacred snake and the sacred bird. Here's another, this is directly from Maria Gimbutas's work. This is from her Goddesses and Gods of the Old World, or of Old Europe. And this is the classical Cucuteni bird or snake goddess. The figurine has no arms, an anonymous head, and leans forward, chevron design on the front and back, striped legs, from northern Moldavia from the end of the 5th millennium. And here we have down here, bird or snake goddess of a different, from Moravia, mid 5th millennium. And here's another image of her. And look at that beautiful, voluptuous bottom she has. Gosh, isn't that just gorgeous? I mean, just look at her and how she's arching. And, if you see birds at the water and they extend out their necks, and they extend back their tail, you can just imagine whoever was carving this was just seeing the flow of the way a woman can hold her body, and the way that the bird and the snake sun themselves, in the waters, maybe on the rocks by the water. Here's another figurine of a goddess. This one has snakes in her hair, with multiple heads like cobras coming out. This is a very, very famous statue. This is the Minoan snake goddess from Crete, again, the island off the coast of Greece, between 1700 and 1450 BCE. So this was like towards the end of what we call the Neolithic time, before the technical Bronze Age, and before the movement of the Indo-Europeans from the steppes and the mountains into the fertile valley of this area. And what we see is, during the time of the Neolithic, it was a peaceful, agrarian, goddess worshiping culture. And so this is, again, sort of after probably they've had one invasion from the Indo-Europeans, which were sky worshiping people and had war and weapons. Before this time, in the Neolithic time in Old Europe, there were no weapons. There's no history and there's no evidence of weaponry that would be used in warfare. So this very, very peaceful civilization. And so after maybe the first flow of people coming in, invading and pillaging their villages, and sadly raping a lot of women and killing a lot of the men, we find mass graves of the Neolithic men as they conquered, as the Indo-Europeans came in and conquered these regions. So somewhere kind of pocketed in there, the nice thing about the is as an island is that it was protected for a little bit longer. So there might have been some influence, but probably not much at this time when these goddesses were made, because they were protected by water from these invasions. So sort of towards the end of the Neolithic here, I think these are just such gorgeous images. So look at her holding the snakes, right? Like, you would not hold snakes if they were something that you feared. You would hold these snakes as something that you worship, as something that you embody, something that can be integrated into you, something that is like a symbol of power. So just look at this beautiful woman holding these snakes. She has these triangle symbols on her belt. She has a cat or panther on her head, at least this one. In this smaller figurine, she's got like a cat panther creature on her head. And you can see this, she still has snakes over her head. On this one, we just have the snakes. But we can see there's a deep connection, deep connection with the regenerative energy of the snake. This one was found later in Athens, Greece. This was found actually in a big pile of rubble with like armor and other artifacts. But this was an image of a goddess flanked by snakes. So on the left, this is the original one that they found, that was made in some sort of pottery, maybe a painting on a wall from a temple. And then this is the refurbished, or like, yeah, like fixed version. They tried to replicate what it would look like if maybe, it had its original paint and colors on it. And you can see how the side angle, the face is actually comes out of this clay. But again, look, she's flanked by these two snakes. She has her arms up, and her hair has almost these snake-like figures. Here's a symbol of a bird. We've got water and circles. And she doesn't, I think one of the things that we know about these ancient cultures is that they included snakes in part of their home worship. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But I just wanted to show you that here is modern day like Bulgaria or no, Romania and Bulgaria. And so as from this region here, as the Indo-Europeans from this more mountainous, dry region started to infiltrate, what we saw was a lot of the old Europe culture during the Neolithic time started to migrate north. So we actually see a lot of similar stories and icons. We think that probably in these regions here and even out to like Lithuania, that the way that the snake was seen was preserved because those areas, a lot of the women, especially who were fleeing, there was a lot of like a huge refugee exodus from this time when the Indo-Europeans started to come in. So they took their culture, their traditions, their way of weaving and painting, they took their sculptures north, and they were met by other goddess cultures. So the Bulgarians and the Romanians and the Ukrainians already had an established goddess worshiping culture. So they integrated their goddess worship and their icons in to these other cultures. So they've been preserved. And we can see little flashes of that, but that's like a whole other side topic. But I just wanted to mention that. So here's where we're going to go for how do we incorporate some of this into how we live our lives today? So this is really cool. In Belarus and in also Bulgaria and in Romania, the house snake, or this idea of the home or hearth snake, was considered to be very, very important. People kept snakes in their homes. They fed them in large families during meals. Children were fed separately from adults, sitting on the floor around a large bowl of food. When the food was served, the house snake would crawl out of its hiding place and would eat together with the children. So isn't that interesting? I was listening to, I'll include a link to this idea of the house snake in Romanian culture. And this woman was saying that, yeah, like the house snake as both a folk legend, but also as a common practice was seen as your house would not be considered healthy unless your house snake was there. And so the house snake as being both literal, a snake living in the house, but also figuratively as the energy of the snake or of the life force or of the regenerative capacity as being part of your home was seen as part of how to know if your home is healthy. And interestingly enough, let's see, we're going to go to this slide. In the Mesolithic Neolithic culture, in Serbia, the dead were often buried under the floor of houses or near or under the hearth, which is like the kitchen. The people from Lepenski Vir culture literally lived with their dead. So if you think about burying your dead under your home, that your ancestors would literally still be with you and they would embalm them. There was like all of these burial rituals, but this is just like one of many sacred sites. And they found this in old Europe as well, is that people were often buried in their homes or under their homes. And then as a home got older, those old house sites would then be burned to the ground, like burned completely. They would let the land sit and then they would build another house over it. And then that house would survive as long as it survived. So in the sort of old Europe region, we would see like layer upon layer of houses built by families on top of one another. And so the ancestors literally lived in the house because their spirits, their bones were there underneath the home for generations and generations. And if we think of snakes as being creatures that live underneath floorboards, they live in the spaces and eaves of homes, in, and under warm areas of the house, like the hearth where the fire was kept. You can see why the symbol of the snake and its shedding of its skin is this regenerative force, that it was seen as revered, and what connected a home to the ancestors that lived in the home before. And keeping a connection to your ancestors was seen as a sign of health. And I, as someone that lives in the modern world, I feel the ache. I feel the pain. I feel the longing to live close to my ancestors' remains and bones. And I know that might sound a little bit dark, but it doesn't feel dark in my body. It feels honoring, it feels real. And it's interesting because my husband and I moved from the East Coast of Maryland back to where I was born, back to where my grandparents are, where my grandfather's buried, back to where all my aunts and uncles and cousins live, back to Minnesota. So in some ways, I've come back home to the land of three generations back. And I've been doing a lot of genealogy and research into the ancestry carried by my Lithuanian and Sicilian heritage. And it's felt like it's not scary. It's not bringing me closer to death, but it's actually bringing me closer to life. It's bringing me closer to the understanding of how short life is and how large these cycles are. And yeah, like what things are coiled in my DNA, right? That I should honor and not dis. So in some other ideas of ways that the snake shows up in the world we live in today is it just happens. Well, it doesn't happen. I don't think it's a mistake. But this year in the Chinese calendar, it's the year of the wood snake. So gosh, what is more earthy than the wood snake as being a symbol of this year and the gift of abundance and intellect and acuity and movement? So I thought that was really neat that we see that symbol even showing up this year. And I also wanted to talk for a minute about reclaiming the snake in our modern iconography. We do see the snake in the symbol of the medical symbol of Asclepius with his staff. So that's often the symbol we see for like the American Medical Association. And I think that's, like that's kind of a cool symbol. And Matthew Wood wrote a great book where he has a whole chapter on the history of Asclepius, the staff and the snake, and the roots of that symbol as it comes through Hermes and the practice of medicine. So if you're interested, there's a book called Seven Sacred Plants, and I'll include a link in the description below. But besides just the medical symbol, we see snakes all around us, but often we see them as something bad, as something to be feared, a symbol of danger. And I just, when I was looking for statues of the Virgin Mary, I was struck by how many of them have her stepping on a snake and killing the snake. But I was like, this is an old, and we know in the Bible the story of the tempting of the snake tempting Adam and Eve. And I think there is, again, this could be a whole other episode, and there's been a lot of people who have spoken about this, but what if we talk about the snake as the primordial goddess energy, the earth energy of rebirth, regeneration, the life force within us, the life force that connects us to the earth and to our humanity? And rather than snuffing it out or stepping on it, of like bringing it in, incorporating it. So I have a few images here of Virgin Mary stepping on the snake, right? Which is supposed to be like lust and greed and all the bad things we're supposed to say no to. But you know what I am doing? Because I have a goddess statue of Mary stepping on the snake, is I said, Mary is touching the snake. She is not killing the snake. She is putting her most earthly part, her foot, her sacred, beautiful foot. She is pressing her sacred foot against the sacred snake as a way of saying, I am here and you are here too. We are here together. And she's standing with her other foot on the crescent moon, another symbol of the goddess of Artemis, right? Of the water. And I don't see her now as stepping on these as to say that she is higher, but stepping on them to say, I am connected. I am not divorced from water. I am not divorced from the goddess of the snake. I am here with you. And I'm like, yes, that is what we need, because we need to connect to the Kundalini Shakti in our bodies. We need to connect to the animating force of this beautiful body that we are inhabiting. So I have this other image of Mary holding this beautiful boa. I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. Look at her, the way she's holding that snake. And then the last part I'm going to weave in is the use of mint. And mint grows in the last class or last episode, I spoke about marshmallow as a marsh water loving plant connected to the symbol of water and the water bird. Today, I am connecting the snake to the element of water and to the herb of mint. And I'll tell you a few reasons why. The first is that mint does grow near water. It often grows near streams and riverbeds. And so it's very deeply connected to the lush waters of the earth. And I grow mint in my garden. I grow all sorts of mints, and they are very dramatic, and they'll like coil down. Have you ever not watered your mint? And it's like, I'm dying. I'm going to just perish. And then you give her some water, and then the mint plant just perks up, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm fine. No problem. I feel like mint is so connected with water, and the way that it grows and moves, and the roots of the mint snake along the surface underground. They like burrow like snakes horizontally out from the base of the plant. So there's a lot of snake-like energy, I think, associated and connected to mint. And mint was used as an herb of the hearth. And so it was often used in ancient Greece, in Rome, in Crete, and probably in many other areas too, to prepare the home for guests. So they would take mint from the garden or from the woods, and they would like smash it, I guess, or like massage it together, like crush the mint, and then they would spread it and massage it into their table, and it would make the table smell fresh and fragrant for their guests coming over. They would also use mint in their water to wash the floors with, and it would give the home this beautiful smell. Mint is also associated with the goddess Venus in classical medical herbalism, and by Nicholas Culpeper, mint is a plant of Venus. And I think Venus and the snake as goddess energy are very similar. So I think using this Venusian plant in your home and even just as an aromatherapy diffuser to have it. And I actually have 3 mint plants growing. They're actually in the windowsill over there right now, but I have them here in early spring growing in my windowsill because they just make me happy. They're lush, they're green, they're vital. And sometimes I can just nibble on a leaf or crush it in my fingers and sniff it while I work. I added it to my ice cream the other night when we had a family dessert night. It's one of those herbs that I think is so versatile, and one that every home should have in it is mint. And it's interesting because mint was used as a snake repellent. I mean, I don't think there's no studies saying that snakes, like, if you grow mint, they won't come. But some people say that snakes will avoid moving their way through mint patches because of the strong smell. And I just think that's because snakes are sensitive. They're like, that's really strong. I don't want to eat that, because they don't eat plants. They eat small things, small creatures, and sometimes big creatures. But they'll often move around mint. But I think, like, to me, almost like crushing mint in the home to refresh it seems like it'd be something that the snake would like, that the home of our snake, or the snake of our home, would really relish in. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And just say that, yeah, I hope you're finding this dive into the goddess symbols and icons and the ways we can bring these teachings into our home. I hope you're finding it helpful and inspiring. We live in a time that can feel very separate from the earth. We can feel like, we might even go a whole day without really feeling part of the earth. And in this goddess series, I hope it encourages you to get outside, to walk barefoot, to look for the vines that grow like snakes, to look for symbols of the snake as you go, to look for actual snakes. I've seen, I think, maybe 4 snakes already this spring. They're starting to wake up from hibernation. And it's like, to me, I'm like, oh, I know spring is coming because the snake is out. So look for the snake. And if you want to engage with the snake in your own hearth, leave a little bowl of milk. They say that that will bring the snake in. And, maybe even if you have a home altar, it might not be a bad idea to have a snake sculpture, a carving of a snake, just some snake imagery to add to your altar to call that goddess, life-giving, ancestral holding wisdom into your home. And the snake wasn't seen. Often I always used to think of the snake as like, oh, you call on the snake to protect you because it can strike and poison people. But now I'm not looking at the snake like that at all anymore. I'm not like it's as in it's gonna fight bad things. It's protective because it moves energy and it spirals and it flows and it connects things together. It's protective in the way that it keeps things in just as much as it might deter things from the outside. So I don't know. Maybe that speaks to you too. And one other way to connect with the snake, if you haven't already thought of it, is through dance. Through dance, through moving your spine, moving your hips, connecting to that vital force that is always wanting to express itself. Always, always. Through our sensual body, through our sexual body, through our watery body, and through movement. So next time you go on a walk, move your hips a little bit more side to side. Next time you're out dancing, let your hair, let the Medusa snakes of your hair go. You can bring these images into your own embodied experience of walking through the world. And I hope you do that for the sake of all of us. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next episode.